Greetings, students! Before I begin, I'd like to thank you for being here. Please like and subscribe, hit the alarm bell, and consider a visit over to the university bookshop linked below, where you can get channel merchandise and zines and all that sort of thing. Now, today, I would like to examine the so-called Hobo nickel. A hobo nickel, I hear you ask. Why, I've heard of an American nickel, and perhaps I can imagine one being issued by another sovereign, though I don't know that any other currencies have a denomination named after that particular metal. But how would a hobo go about issuing a nickel? Or perhaps you mean that a hobo was selected for the portrait on a nickel. That would indeed be odd. Yes. In a sense, you are right on both accounts. The hobo nickel was issued by no central authority, but by any hobo who happened to have a nickel to spare and a knife sharp enough to whittle a new face into the soft metal of the official American currency. In 1913, the American Treasury decided to issue a new coin for its most liquid of currencies, the nickel. The coin was no mere afterthought at the time, with its value hovering around a modern-day dollar. It was quite a bit more useful than it is today. But neither did that make it too precious to alter. The new nickel featured a bold new portrait, not a head of state or a mythological figure as the coins that preceded it, but an American Indian on its obverse and a buffalo on its reverse. The noteworthy thing here was the size of the face in the portrait. Unlike previous faces, which took up only a minor fraction of the coin, the so-called Indian head nickel proved a large canvas for alteration. And alter they did. Hobos cut all manner of death's heads, soldiers, and foreign rulers on these nickels, but by far the most popular design, in fact, one that came to be known as the standard design amongst collectors, was one very familiar to the carver, a derby-wearing hobo. Thousands of these coins still exist, traded by antiquarians and numismatists alike. Knowing what we do about hobos and the company they kept, I could not help but wonder, for whom were these coins minted, and what was bought with these strange artifacts? The mundane answer, of course, is that this is a way of improving the value of these common coins. There is something quite fintech about the operation, to take literal money and make it more valuable by transforming it into a piece of art. This property, to make money more valuable than itself, is a theme that will come up again later. But we know the hobos were not only engaged in mundane pursuits. How might we begin to deduce how this coin was used in more peculiar endeavors? For this, I'd like to consider a concept springing from ancient medicine that seems to underlie much magical thinking: the Doctrine of Signatures. Subtextual in the ancient pharmacopoeias of Dioscorides and Galen, explicit in the magical writings of Paracelsus, and given a name in the 1621 book, The Signature of All Things by Jacob Boehme, and applied with utter clarity in Nicholas Culpeper's Complete Herbal. It is a concept with a quite long developmental history, but to put it simply, the doctrine states that the quote-unquote natural properties of a thing suggest its occult properties. For example, lungwort, with its speckled, lung-shaped leaves, was said to cure diseases of the lungs, and toothwort, with its tooth-shaped flowers, was supposed to cure toothaches. This theory can be understood not only in a medical context, but in a magical one as well. The spikes of a blackthorn tree are not only physically dangerous, but the fact that the blackthorn tree's nature is to produce dangerous spikes is the reason that it is the wood of choice for the aggressive blasting rods of Scottish witchcraft. So, what are the properties of the buffalo nickel, which was used to create hobo nickels? Two things make this nickel stand out among its compatriot coins. First, I'll note that Congress replaced it as soon as they could, a mere 25 years after its original issue. The stated reason for this is that the date on it was easily worn away during circulation. So this is our first deduced property. It denies the year, or is agnostic with regard to time. Secondly, I'd like to describe a peculiar incident known as the Hobbs Affair. A company that manufactured machinery to detect counterfeit coinage objected to the design of the new nickel on the grounds that it would be difficult to detect counterfeits. The sculptor refused to make the requested changes, and the appeals went first to the Secretary of Treasury, until eventually going all the way up to President Taft, with the matter ultimately being decided in the favor of the sculptor. This quality of being easily counterfeited, or to put it another way, of counterfeits being easily passed off as the real thing, suggests a relationship between this coin and illusory wealth. It puts me in mind of a trope in fairy stories, that gold gifted by the spirits after the departure of said spirits is revealed to be nothing but, for example, a pile of dead leaves. It also reminds me of the process of speculation, the fabrication of wealth out of the expectation of wealth. Both of these trends have points of contact with the hobo story we've been uncovering. Collapsing speculation markets were shown in our first video in this series to be one of the two periodical reinvigorators of hobo activity. And of course, more recently, we have been discussing the hobo spirit connection in depth. Moreover, counterfeiting, to make something unlike the coin look like the coin, is the opposite of the practice of coin alteration that hobos practiced on these nickels. And as we know, opposites are identical in nature and opposite in degree. The nickel, in this period, seems to stand out as a coin of slippery identity, a coin of glamour, in which value is particularly unfixed. One final aside that I feel it incumbent on me to mention. The sculptor of this coin was tipped $666 on approval of the coin. This lends a certain ominous air to the proceedings, does it not? Of a piece with the start date of this coin's issue being the 13th year of the 20th century, it is as though the coin was specifically selected for infernal use. In any case, we have analyzed the specific coin, but what of coins in general? Well, they are used to buy things, you say. Oh, student. Ah, yes, but not only things, retort I, and not only experiences either, before you jump to that conclusion. Coins are also used in more ephemeral ways. As attested in the 1997 film The Edge, in certain cultures, giving someone a knife will do violence to their relationship unless they give the gifter a coin, thus transmuting the gift into a purchase. Even more abstractly, a wishing well is a site where good fortune can be purchased for a coin. Whether that be a job promotion or true love, it seems anything is for sale at such a site. The most profitable wishing well in the world is in Rome at the terminus of its aqueduct. It is called Trevi Fountain and has been the site for major municipal projects for thousands of years. Local authorities report that harvesting the coins thrown into Trevi Fountain brought in $1.6 million in 2016 alone. And for nothing more than people tossing coins into it. It's quite a business model. But Trevi is no general wishing well. There are standard wishes there. And the first one is this: to return to Rome. As the foremost wishing well's presiding wish, might this suggest that return fare is a specific property of coinage? And if so, to where might the hobo nickel allow one to return? And on what vessel? There is another type of passage associated with the coin, and that is the passage into death. though popular belief, derived from Victorian sources, have coins being placed over the eyes of the dead in order to obscure the ghastly visage of a dried-eyed corpse. The older tradition has it placed under the tongue. The Greek formulation of this is Charon's Obol. The Obol, of course, is the name of a coin, and Charon, the ferryman of the dead. The coin would be given to the ferryman by the dead spirit for sake of passage fare to the land of the deceased. It is interesting that the Victorians moved the coin from the mouth to the eyes. The reason for this may have been overcrowding. The ancient word for Charon's Obol was viaticum. It means sustenance, as in this was a necessary provision for the journey. As Christianity replaced Greek traditional religion, so too was the substance of that viaticum replaced with the Holy Sacrament. A piece of bread, much like a coin, was a necessary provision for a journey on foot. The persistence of this base practice, setting something in the mouth for the journey ahead, is striking. Charon is also a figure worthy of a little more interrogation. There are essentially 4 Charons I'd like to briefly touch on, with minor differences between them. The ancient Greek Charon was a rough seaman who ferried souls across the swamps of the river Charon. As a swamp ferryman, he used a pole with which he could propel his craft around trees and sandbars to the opposite shore. The classical Greek Charon was more genteel, but otherwise quite similar. Not so with the Etruscan offshoot, though. Charoon, I hope I am getting that U in there enough to be heard. Charoon, not Charon, was a monstrous lackey of the god of death who would rip dead souls from their bodies and carry them, not by ferry, but by chariot, to the underworld. He still had his stick, but on the end of it was a brutal hammerhead. When the Etruscan culture gave way to the Greek-obsessed Romans, the Roman Charon ended up taking on some of the monstrousness of Charoon and the essential functions of Charon. Though his portfolio was slightly expanded, by the time we get to the Roman Charon, he is equally at home in the river Styx and on the swamps of Acheron, trading his stick or hammer for an oar. And moreover, all trace of gentility is gone. Virgil, the great Latin poet, describes him thus: a sordid god. Down from his hairy chin a length of beard descends, uncombed, unclean, and notes that a girdle foul with grease binds his obscene attire. The mutable points here in the evolution of this entity are pertinent to our study. The stick terminates in something, and is usually depicted cocked over the shoulder. Is that a hammerhead, or is it an oar? Or is that a bindle? The method of transportation also seems to change to fit the setting. To the Etruscans, he drove a chariot or rode horseback, but to the Greeks he ran a ferry or a raft. When he washed up on the American shore, is it possible that he hopped the tracks and commandeered himself a train? Perhaps conducting the famous westbound train. I am reminded again of the anonymous riddle we examined previously. If 2 train passed on a single track, the secret has been hid. These here 2 train tried it, and it simply can't be did. The unkempt descriptions of Charon certainly match the stereotypical hobo, for whom unruly facial hair is a stereotype of such force that without it, the hobo is hard to recognize. The ritual word for obol was viaticum, and viaticum means provision. Moreover, the original form of obols was not as a small disc of silver, but as a spit of copper, that is, a long stick. The obol itself resembled a bindle, and the bindle was a bundle that contained provisions. The image of the classic hobo is indeed the image of Charon with payment in hand. But why all this flattery of Charon in the hobo's iconic style? And what became of the great hobo nickel carvers, anyway? Few of their nicknames are even known, and fewer still of their names. Bo and Bert were the two foremost carvers of hobo nickels, and both of their biographies peter out with a mere last seen at. One is reminded of the biblical accounts of Enoch and Elijah, men so godly that they were taken to heaven before their deaths. But what if one weren't godly? At least in the Christian sense. What if one resembled another god? A god that takes payment to fairy souls. What might such a person pay that god? And where would that fee get them? Let's look at the symbolic meaning of carving a hobo nickel. The defacing of the coin at once offends the Native American, whose face originally graced the coin, not, I would point out, an individual, but the generalized idea of a Native American was the sculptor's insistence of his depiction, and likewise offends the American government, which has articulated laws against the alteration of its coinage. And so, the carving of one's own visage, or at least the carving of a hobo by a hobo, is a declaration of authority on two counts: by conquest, superseding the American government, and by tradition, superseding the American Indian. Moreover, if we accept the similarity of the Charon to Obol, the image of the hobo could well be a tribute to that chthonic deity, making it at once fair and tribute when offered up by a beau found hitching a ride back east. Moreover, as we established earlier, this nickel had a natural quality of erasing its year, or being disjunct in time. So here is my theory. We know that a hobo population preceded the inaugural wave of hobos, and that it likely had its start near the Panic of 1817 and the War of 1812. This was, so to speak, a station for the train. We also know that the Panic of 1873, the one that triggered the golden age of hoboing, was caused by speculation in railroads. Moreover, we established earlier that the hobo nickel was allied with fairy money because of its relationship to counterfeit. Could it be that the initial hobo nickels were used to pay Charon's fee on an eastbound train back in time to 1812, at which time the fully disembodied hobos hopped off and used the remaining now spectral coins as magical fetishes in a ritual to invest fairy money in the railroads, thereby ensuring that in their own future lives and those of their compatriots the railroads were built, while simultaneously containing the seeds of the very crash that produced the hobo-cultural movement in the first place? And did those disembodied hobos then stick around as guides and old-timers to the hobos who followed them? This gives a sort of eschatology to our hobo story, which I do find most appealing. And so we conclude. Well, I say conclude, but I do actually have another video in the series planned. A bit of a low-stakes coda in which we apply what we have just supposed to further analysis and uncover another station on this journey. Thank you for attending this lecture, oh my students. I look forward to your discussion below. Please do like and subscribe and head on over to the university shop, which I believe has recently been updated with a t-shirt or two, and of course still contains the emoji grimoire and a bit of bizarro fiction by the puppeteer. You can also pay your tuition there as a one-off or a recurring payment as a way of tipping us for the work that we do here at the university. Until next time, may the pyramid's eye watch over us all.